It's August 13th, 2018. Michael Hoberman and Mark Klempner are interviewing David Arfa at McCusker's Market in Shelburne Falls. And first question, I've probably asked this of you before, since I've known you for a long time, and maybe in my previous oral history interview I asked you the same question, but for the record, we want to know how you ended up in this area in Western Massachusetts. What's the story behind that?
Mm-hmm. Came here because married Kim Erslev, and meeting her in the early 90s, we actually were living in Philadelphia. She lived here in the mid-80s. When we decided to get married, we looked around. When we were dating, she came up to school here, to UMass Amherst, and visiting up here, saw this was a great area. And so when we decided to get married, we didn't want to get married and leave Philadelphia. That felt sad. So we came up here and lived up here because we like very much that it's rural. There's also universities and Jewish community too. Mm-hmm. So I got here in the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm. And, well, you can just go right from there. I mean, I guess it would help to hear a little bit about where you came from, by contrast with where you are now. So what was, where did you grow up? And
grew up in Detroit, in the suburbs, a conservative synagogue, and studied ecology and environmental policy at Michigan State, and not sure how much detail here or not.
Yeah, as much as you feel is, you know, to inform this.
What was your level of connection with Judaism?
So the Jewish path, so conservative synagogue, went to Hebrew school. We actually moved to Minnesota for a couple years in junior high and moved back to a different suburb, but the same synagogue. So it was really cool being with that same community. It was a Sunday morning program, and got to, you know, we just talked. It's facilitated by a school counselor, Mr. Gurman. So it just felt really good. It's really about building community, listening to each other, current events, interesting topics. And my senior year, they had an Orthodox rabbi come in as a teacher to the conservative synagogue. And he had us do a Shabbaton at his house. We observed Shabbat fully, and he sent a letter when I was at Michigan State saying, come on a trip to Israel. And it was from him, but it was more about a program. I thought it was like, oh, he's sending me a letter. And it was an Orthodox program. It said, come learn Jewish history, Jewish philosophy, Jewish law, a traditional perspective. And I didn't quite know what that meant at that time. But it sounded good. I was actually looking for a semester abroad and realized it was just too expensive for me. And then I saw this program, and it was a summer program, 4 weeks, 2 weeks in Connecticut studying yeshiva, then 4 weeks in Israel. And I did it, and it was amazing. It was amazing. It was my introduction to Jewish, traditional Jewish life. And the program in Israel was 3 days of study, 3 days of touring the country. So it was really great for us college kids and exploring. It was very just exciting. And after I graduated as an undergraduate, I went back for a school year to study in yeshiva for a year. And I was really pretty open and I had my questions about evolution. And by the end of the year, I didn't see Orthodoxy as truth with a capital T, but I did see it as really inspiring and as a life path. And so from there, I worked at a Jewish environmental organization that was in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical School basement, Shomrei Adamah. And that community is where I met Kim. And that community in Philadelphia, in Mount Airy, is totally progressive Jewish community where the Jewish community is not only made up of rabbinical students, so it's like all this energy at services, but there was also Reb Zalman, and the Jewish renewal community was very, there's a lot happening there. So having services with Reb Zalman, and he would teach courses at the Germantown Jewish Center for $25 10 weeks about introduction to Jewish renewal or Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah and what those things were. I didn't realize how amazing and rare that it was. And I did graduate school in environmental education with the Audubon Expedition Institute. This was an alternative program, traveling, experiential program, studying environmental issues in different issues of the country. And so from that program to Jewish renewal, I saw like both, we sat in circles, we talked together. And the importance of experience was at the center of that, both of us. And so I really, it inspired me very much.
When you say the importance of experience, what we mean exactly by that?
That Jewish renewal is, for me, it was this experiential Judaism. Like services were these experiential workshops that were created. So, for instance, these are and this is from Reb Zalman's work. Really, so these are the Psalms of King David. Let's turn to your neighbor and share them as if you're writing them from your week. Put in your own words. And by the way, don't forget that you're not talking to your neighbor. That's the face of God, right? Right there, and just. So it was very participatory. Very participatory in the sense of what's the experience. You would always say like the prayer book is freeze-dried food, and so our work is like bringing it to life. And so there's a template here in the prayer book that's really this guide for us. And that inspired me very much. And seeing, and how they really experimented a lot with Jewish mysticism, with Kabbalah. They focus on the four worlds, and it really inspired me to just begin learning and how to integrate these things. And what is it? Where's it coming from? Question of what's authentic and what's not authentic. It's really haunted me a lot when I was younger. And I love stories as well. So then finding Martin Buber, and he has a book, For the Sake of Heaven, which is all Hasidic stories turned into a novel. Do you know that book? So really kind of inspiring me that we have a lot here in Jewish life.
I didn't know Buber had written a novel.
Yeah. In Hebrew it's Gog v'Magog. And it's about two Hasidic masters, a teacher and a student. And their urgency about wanting to bring end of war and hatred and greed to the world. And the teacher, the seer of Lublin, wants to do it through a small group of serious meditators. Prayer intensive, we'll do it. But the student, the Yehudi, said no, it's when everyone's heart turns. It's a very educational, we got a very different approach. So that's what he does. He kind of shows those two approaches.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So maybe since you've talked about where you came from, and particularly these sort of, I guess I'm going to just say metropolitan, like Philadelphia and Detroit, how those experiences compare to your more recent experiences, let's say the last 20 or so years that you've been in this part of the world. How is your Jewish life in Western Massachusetts different from, and how is it connected to those previous experiences?
Yes, exactly.
Just like there's people.
And it's like making a I wrote this in one of my privilege, and I realized it's not really a sermon. But it's like being in another covenant. A covenant gorgeous, is it?
Being in Israel and then in Philly, I was actually outside about an hour west of the city in Kimberton and teaching high school during those years and living on a farm, but coming into Philadelphia for the Jewish community and services and holidays. and the level of just intensity of being Jewish there was so like you could soak it up. You know, you can come and then there's all this energy that you can receive because of the nature of the community there and the level of teachers there. And I remember when I was dating Kim and she came back up here to UMass and I was still down there, we had a choice. Either go to a Passover Seder with Reb Zalman in Philadelphia, or lead one up here. And because of the timing and everything, we really wanted to lead one up here, and just to be up here and for that whole time. And I always remember that, you know, it's got a group of people. There's maybe 15 of us, and talking about Mitzrayim as the narrow place. And how the whole conversation turned to like caving stories of being in narrow places and trying to like not stay there the whole time and not being so effective of that. But it was really stories of the outing club was the Seder, very different than in Philadelphia, where it's really looking at the reflective inner path of the meaning of the Seder and all of us. So it was like a detour that, and I felt like, oh yeah, it's not quite the same, the community here, the community there. And yet there is a critical mass here too. Right? So there are a number of synagogues, Amherst, Northampton, Greenfield, Brattleboro. There are scholars and residents that come as well, so getting some good education that way. And worked at Hillel for several years and having a Jewish life being available. But it was really the sense of both how do I internalize Jewish life to really be a carrier of it and not just a receiver when I was younger. And so being here really brought more out of me as a teacher and a sharer of what I love about Jewish life. And
she thought we should put out a search until everyone on that painting this time.
And I just have experience with the struggles of rural New England synagogue life, and the struggles of what it means when it's hard to have a critical mass, and how to build that. In that that's challenge. It's got its own challenges.
Yeah. Well, you were hinting. I mean, I thought you were kind of hinting before when you were talking about the people talking about their caving experiences. That maybe this is what you were hinting at. That there's also, I guess, a lack of immersion, or maybe I hate to say it, but a sort of a lack of sort of broader Jewish knowledge on the part of people in a place like this. Is that one of the challenges that you face? You know, in other words, in metropolitan Philadelphia or in other big cities, there's such a storehouse of Jewish knowledge, and people are really deeply enmeshed in it. And here it's, I don't know, at least I experience it as kind of purely volitional. Like I can be as Jewish or as indifferent to Jewishness as I want to at a given moment.
Right. I'd say it's not only about Jewish knowledge at the base, because I think that is true. That's certainly a community of rabbinical students, making up the community.
Yeah.
But it's also this assumption that in Philadelphia, that Jewish life is also about our inner life, and that there is this real connection. That's more than knowledge alone, but there is this path, of that depth that Jewish life has. So that gem right there is like an additional challenge to make those connections for people.
Yeah.
Because people, I think, have it here very much of like there's a real seeking. There's a lot of seekers here, but seeing Jewish life or just religion as being a forum for seeking, like traditional Western religions, right? There's a bridge there to cross. You see that.
Well, since you brought it up anyway, and since I know particularly from what you said before we started about your new job, it seems to me that one of the opportunities that one has in a community like this, where Jews are in small in number and almost invisible in some ways, there are many opportunities for interacting with people of other faiths. And not necessarily formal faiths, but just other people who learn from other spiritual traditions. So maybe you could talk about what that's been like for you over the years. How you, as a person who takes Judaism very seriously, have engaged and maybe participated in other spiritual communities.
So that's been wonderful. A wonderful thing about here. And so being part of interfaith groups, there's Interfaith Environmental Task Force, the Franklin County Interfaith Environmental Task Force that I'm part of for about 5 or 6 years when I first moved here. That was really wonderful. I find there is a network of progressive Christian ministers in this area. That has really been wonderful connections of people who appreciate the Bible and can really see. And also being introduced to new perspectives through that process, of seeing meaningful Christian practice for the first time, of seeing contemplative Christian practice. The Congregational Church in Greenfield, the Second Congregational Church, brought Thomas Keating, who began centering prayer, and teaches classes in centering prayer. And Armin Poole, who was the old minister, the last minister, maybe 2 ministers ago, worked with Thomas Keating and bringing centering prayer to life, and just had all these very rich, not only as being a great teacher, but all the stories and just how that began, which feel like by being here, that's been a great gift to be part of that.
Do you find
also,
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's also Buddhism. Buddhism is so central here as well, in seeing different faces of Buddhist practice and being able to access meditation groups and folks like Thich Nhat Hanh, and with Roe as well, bringing spiritual teachers from around, particularly Joanna Macy, who's very inspiring to me, who mixes Buddhism and deep ecology and systems thinking all together, as well as being this phenomenal experiential educator. And I feel like that's this area, because I live here, I've been able to have those experiences.
Do you find that people that you've met and interacted with from those different spiritual strains find ways to learn from you and appreciate Jewish tradition, or do you have opportunities to kind of impart a little bit of the Jewish tradition to them in such a way as that they actually take it in and
I think so.
Enrich their practice?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been mutual. There's been a way, and certainly by choosing to wear a yarmulke, brings up all sorts of conversations. And there's a lot of, what does it mean to people? And so people have their preconceived notions, and it can be this opportunity for sharing. And particularly that there's diversity within Jewish life and Jewish practice and Jewish experience. And an openness to talk about, I think, the kind of traditional supersessionism of Christian life, the relationship of Christianity with Judaism, and how they grew up together, and some of those assumptions that people carry by being just a Jewish man in the community that has allowed those conversations to happen. Yeah. And I feel really grateful for just living in the time that we live in, because there's incredible openness, and there's also incredible scholarship on the Jewish roots of Christianity, and that's been very rich. So I'm in a Talmud group, for instance. It's called the Talmud group, right? It's about 10 men, totally interfaith. But it began, I guess, way back, they began looking at Talmud, but it's just been, like right now we're reading Heschel together. We read Jewish texts, we read Ecclesiastes, and we've read Job, and Ideen Steinsaltz has a book on Jewish myth, 13 Petaled Rose, and doing that in this interfaith with a retired minister, and just atheist, Buddhist, just public intellectual types of folks, real philosophers who just love to wrestle with ideas.
This is the group that I know Bob Rottenberg.
Yeah, this is Bob's
so
group.
you Skype in.
Exactly, he Skypes in from California. And still going on. It's been, I don't know how many years.
Yeah, so I know Rob Riggin.
He's part of it.
He told me about it a couple of years ago.
Exactly, that's the group. So it's amazing, and it's because of where we are. That's a really rich thing about this place.
So within the Jewish world today, given all your sort of eclectic and ecumenical tendencies, where within the Jewish world do you nowadays do you look for, I don't know, spiritual guidance and advice? What stands out for you recently as if you're looking for some, another way to put this is, who are your rabbis these days?
Yeah. It's a tough question. I feel Jewishly, and I've worked with the synagogue in Greenfield, the synagogue in Brattleboro, and most recently I'm employed with the synagogue in North Adams as the director of education, a couple of years, director of education in Brattleboro, worked with a teen program for several years in Greenfield and other things. What I realized when I first moved here, I thought the synagogue could carry my sense, what I can imagine of Jewish life, and I realized it was that was unrealistic for the institution to be able to carry kind of my Jewish heart that way, that they would go together, and realize, kind of really learn about institutions that they have, they're like the ocean liner trying to turn. It's not so, turn on a dime. It's big communities with very diverse communities. So communally, I feel like I'm a supporter of Jewish life. And where do I get nourished? That's a good question. So here, I have a friend who's a chaplain rabbi. That we have a really similar path she was an environmental educator, a science teacher, and a storyteller, performing professional storytelling for a while, as well as becoming a rabbi and a chaplain. And leading outdoor services out in the Boston area. So I count her as someone who really kind of nourishing that way. And I think it's more books too. I'm still really fed from Jewish books.
Are there titles that come to mind just from your recent reading?
Well, maybe I'll start with just like books, really prominent books that really stand out for me. Is Reimagining the Bible by Howard Schwartz. Is a book where he really shows how stories through Jewish tradition have changed over the years, but they're always about like the core stories are there, but every generation chooses some parts and ignores other parts. And that freedom to play with story over time really inspires me, as that every story has a storyteller in Jewish history. And so that, as an Agadista, Magid, as that's my new word, Agadista. I feel like it's like that's the work of being able to craft stories. That's a very traditional way.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure about that at first. And so I found these books that, the diversity of Jewish life and Jewish stories, and that everyone's always pulling some things forward and leaving others behind. This has been really meaningful for me. There's a book, The Cultures of the Jews, with an S, Cultures with an S, by David Bialy or Bial. That's an anthology about Jewish life from ancient times to today. And really just, again, the diversity of experience really showed to me how, being Jewish in 1700 Poland was very different than 1700 Italy, post-Renaissance Italy, where there were bare-breasted women on ritual items of ketubot and like these linen boxes, and versus Poland, was very insular. And in Italy, there was more, the ministers would come, and priests, I guess, coming to the synagogue to hear sermons, and the ghetto was locked at night too, so not to romanticize it, but just that diversity, let alone 1,500 Sfats, 1,200 Baghdad, or 1,200 Spain, where the Zohar was written. And the translator Daniel Mack calls the Zohar this a proto-novel of sacred fantasy, with the goddess as the main character. What? What's that? And having this whole rich tradition, or in 700-800 Baghdad, where according to the cultures of the Jews, many of the Jews were actually teachers of early Islam. Many converted, feeling like this was the new path for real. And then others there was just a lot of openness. And then in the Jewish community, the Torah was called Quran. The rabbi was called Imam. And a common name for God was Allah. Because they spoke Arabic. Right? Just because so it's like that kind of like, it's very opening for me. And just Midrash itself. So I love that the Reverend Susan Thistlewaite, who's a Protestant minister, calls the Midrash and the Talmud ancient postmodern literature because of how diverse it is. And that there's many voices, and that it's all there. It's not just one. So I talk about what nourishes me. That's these books and sources and ideas. I'm very nourished.
That's so interesting. And you kind of articulate to what to me sounds like a sort of a common theme, which is that examples from the past can point the way to an interesting future. We can look to the past and find postmodernism in it.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
To go back to people, you had mentioned your connection with Reb Zalman Schachter. Did that stay on until he passed, or? Yes.
It did. I mean, through workshops and classes. Not that I was close with him, but enough where I learned with him probably a dozen times of Shabbatons and week-long workshops and things of that nature, and the Jewish Renewal community of Rabbi Marsha Prager and Arthur Laska, like others in that community, who've been very inspiring for me.
I would think you would connect with Waskow because he was so much into the ecology of Judaism.
Absolutely. I actually worked with him for 2 summers. He did a program called the Eco Shalom Corps. So we brought in, it was a residential program, and we really had this, and it happened to be at Eilat Chaim, the first 2 years that Eilat Chaim was in existence. So we were there with college students and really exploring our Jewish identity and our ecological identity in this residential environment, and with all these incredible teachers coming on through. That was really, for me, just as much as these students, very inspirational and meaningful and life-changing, of kind of seeing this new creative burst that Jewish life is offering. Yeah, very much. I mean, and it's
That would be, who's collecting, who's going to do the next sermons?
I miss those days too, right? I mean, just that excitement of the creativity, the Jewish creativity, having a whole community of creative Jewish life and act like this. It's powerful. People really making connections, really making connections, and that inspires me very much, for sure. And that's a challenge of living here, just rurally, and just the busyness of life, and just that lack. That was such an intense time, and also, like, there's a story in the Talmud about this community, like, it was saying, the other rabbi, like, has to teach the kids, like, Mishnah and Torah, because can you believe they don't know Torah? He says, in my community, we have to grow the flax first, and then harvest the flax, and first we have to get some deer, right? And the flax is to make the rope, to get the deer, to to write the Torah, and I don't remember all of it, but it's like, that's what they had to do now. Like, so there's this sense of we're part of generational processes, and for me, there's also my ecological identity, if you will, where I'm committed to living in one place and really trying really hard to be able to live here and have my work be here and not have to move and be able to be committed to living here. And there's something very special about this place, because there's, I think, a lot of people who agree with that too, So it creates something special here. There's this long-term commitment that allows for different things to happen.
Seekers.
Huh?
Seekers.
Of seekers, yeah. And of being in one place and really committing to a place. Yeah.
Well, as a segue to the idea of one place, but a movement to a different topic, you mentioned at the very beginning traveling to Israel in your youth. Israel weighs heavily on the Jewish psyche in the current day and age, and I wonder if you could talk about your relationship as an individual, as a Jew, to Israel, and how the subject of its existence influences or doesn't influence, shapes or doesn't shape your Jewish identity today.
For me, it's a minor part of my Jewish identity. Spending time there. I was there in the summer of 1987 for the first Intifada, and we would go, being in a traditional Orthodox program, our field trips were to Beit Lechem, to Rachel's tomb, Bethlehem, where Rachel was buried, to go daven mincha, the afternoon prayers, and we went to Hebron and Kiryat Arba, right outside of Hebron, to go to the cave, and there. The militarization of Israel really came across, even at that time. say this. I mean, when we were in Hebron, we met someone. We were instructed to stay in a tight group, and we had, I don't know who he was, but he had he was, a guard. He was part of Kiryat Arfa, but he just had his weapons on him, several, and hidden. And, we just kind of walked to make sure there was no trouble. And then on the bus coming out, all the kids, they had their fingers, and they were shooting us with their fingers, as we were going. It's like, I was very apolitical. And just kind of learning more. But I mean, at that point, my undergraduate work was more science than, and environmental policy was just beginning. And set up a problematic, a challenging relationship with Israel. At the same time, like where I was in yeshiva, was in Jerusalem, and we were looking over the Judean hills, and on Shabbat, we would turn at L'cha Dodi, and outside it's all windows, there's balconies and windows. And it was beautiful, and I realized, it took me until November. I was going in September, and by November, I realized the sun is still right on the mountains, right? It's like they're timing this. So we turn, and having the sun and really kissing the mountains as we do L'cha Dodi, and that sense of connection with the land. And learning that in Svat, in the 1500s, they would going out to the fields dressed in white. Wow, we just have this remnant of turning. And this was the land, up in Svat, a little farther north from where I was, but just that sense of the ancient history that I was connected with. Mm-hmm. So that piece really profoundly came, but the politics of the modern state of Israel, has been just less dominant in my in my identity. Yeah.
Thanks. I have one last question, but maybe Mark has other things he wants to ask. My last question is if you could try to, I bet you strike me as the kind of person who would listen to that program, On Being with Krista Tippett.
Yes.
Okay. Well, her last question is always, I think it's always some version of tell me what does it mean to be a human being? So my variation on that is, for you, what does it mean to be Jewish? What is the most important legacy to you personally of Judaism?
That I am part of a multi-generational story, this heritage that stretches back to the ancient world, and that I am entrusted as a torchbearer for this time, and the sense that hope and despair, struggles with hope and despair, have been part of the whole tradition. And it's right. So this mandate to find hope, really find hope, and to share hope even in the darkest of places. And I feel like of history of Jewish life as I've received that from my Jewish identity. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. You do have.
Just, I'd heard about you as being a storyteller, and you did mention said a little bit about the stories.
Yeah.
But could you tell more about your identity as a storyteller?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mentioned for the sake of heaven. So as a young teacher, I discovered stories that, I would share stories, often Native American stories, from collections. Just kids love stories. I love telling stories, and that groups of kids are just quiet, and they lean in and can talk about stories afterwards. And like the Lorax, who's the Onceler, and what are needs, and like really sophisticated conversations with, fifth graders about consumer society and what's important in life, and what, it's like, and that we're connected to the forest around us and the world around us. So that I've loved stories, and it's like I think it's gonna be another hour of talking, so I'm trying not to do that. Are you? Took a class at Greenfield Community College on storytelling that Mark Benjamin actually told me about, and it was phenomenal. He had us do 20-minute stories. Will Roberts was teaching it, 20-minute stories, and take the beginning of one story, the middle of another, the ending of a third story, set it in Greenfield, bring your Uncle Lou into it, join the folk process. And that really shifted, like for me, of like, oh, I can be a storyteller, not just like sharer of stories, like as a teacher. I could be a storyteller. And the stories I went to were Yiddish stories. There's a treasury of Yiddish short stories by Irving Howe from the 50s. Eliezer Greenberg and Nathan Ostabel has this great book of Jewish folklore that's amazing collection. And I began telling stories from that, and these long stories, and people responded well, and I responded well. It was good. So, and then finding Martin Buber for the sake of heaven. So that's where it really dovetailed together. And in the storytelling community, there are Native American storytellers who really feel they're culture bearers, and African American storytellers as culture bearers. And that sense was like, oh, so Jewish storyteller as a culture bearer, what is that? And that's so really influenced by other storytellers, and to begin, like, we can do this, to really do this. And there's this role, this magid, this word, storyteller. And I see it as an art form. There are folks that say this, that gives smicha for storytelling, for being a magid in the Jewish community. So I claim the title of magid. I mean, that's part of my identity. And but for me, it's an artist. It's like it's an artist. I'm a storyteller. And as a storyteller, it means really working with the creativity of shaping stories as well as telling stories. And as I've learned, and as I shared a little bit earlier, that is the traditional way. I'm convinced of that now. It's like I'm willing to talk with anyone about this, because this is the traditional way of really crafting our stories, finding what's needed for our generation. What do we want to leave behind? That's how historians talk about the stories. They talk about the Greek Abraham, right? And they show how the surrounding cultures are part of Jewish life and are always shaping the stories and the practices too of the evolution of Jewish life, as the Reconstructionists say. And realizing, so in Jewish renewal, Kabbalah is very central in Hasidism. So that inspires me very much, because Hasidism, it's story being center to their expression of Jewish life. as well as song and dance and expression and silence and meditation. And so very inspired by that. And realizing that, so Kabbalah, that like the Zohar, it's image-based. We have a tradition, and oftentimes people talk about allegory. Oh, the princess, and Shekhinah, or it's like the one-to-one relationship. But what if it's like art? What if it's like a dream that it's wide open, it's associative. So I'm very inspired by that in fact is associative literature that is this image-based fuel for story. And then you can see images that follow of just these images, the tree of life, the nest of a golden bird. And then it appears in stories. So these images are used. That's part of our building blocks. So that's very exciting. Very exciting. I wish there was a chair in Jewish storytelling somewhere for artists.
Do you think you
May
might
it come to be?
Do you think you might be sitting at a bedside of someone at Bay State and use storytelling as a way of being a chaplain?
Sometimes, for sure, but as a chaplain, it's more listening. It's more story listening and really finding what are the images that's in their life. So if someone were to tell me a dream from their memory, or just they go back into their memory and they share, that's the image to work with.
I could imagine some stories coming out of it, though. If you're a listener,
Yes,
your stories are going to
Absolutely.
start to emerge from their stories.
Absolutely.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very much so.
Great questions. Well, anything else we want to talk about? Are we missing anything?
I wanted to share something that's special to me about living in this place and being committed to this place, which from your earlier interviewing really captured, I think, is this sense of land and ecological identity and how it connects with our Jewish identity. And that here, it's a special place for that. And I see over the past 20 years, there's been a real growth of consciousness because of where we are, and that more and more Jewish environmental projects happening, and more people who have experience with Jewish environmental interconnections are moving here because it's a great place to be and developing. There's something I feel like we're in the beginning stages of developing, and there are those who are good teachers and administrators, like Rabbi Jacob Fine, who's able to bring, Abundance Farm to a synagogue. That's the first in the country. That's really a wonderful model that has ripples. And there's something about being in this place and really feeling like there's an awareness that Judaism supports us always asking what's needed in our generation with the history of the past and the teachings of the past to be a legacy of wisdom and a heritage that we can draw from in meaningful ways. And just living where we are, I'm just really struck that there's a lot, the rabbi in Greenfield, Andrew Kilkiner, was the head of the Interfaith Environmental Task Force in the Hartford area, among many other things, totally committed to food sustainability, growing food, preserving food. We got a grant up in Brattleboro from the Gendler grapevine that I was helped begin to really, they're on a farm and they have about 12 acres of land, of field and forest. So being able to, we built steps to have access to the fields, mowed paths so we can actually go out for the Amida, build a little spot or build benches for under a tree. We worked with the Conservation Committee in Brattleboro to create trails in the forest that connect up with the town of Brattleboro's trails. And it's happening like in this place here. You know, there's, that's just an exciting piece about being here. And it inspired me when I look at my own Jewish life and what I want. That's why I like of, you know, leading contemplative services / hikes, strolls at the high ledges. Just inspired by this and how do we, again, just this sense of, from Reb Zalman's sense that it's freeze-dried, how do we activate Jewish life for ourselves in our hearts, you know, and have these rich blessings, this rich tradition of connected with the natural world through blessings, through holidays, through practices of farming practices and food gathering and this fierce commitment to social justice, to the community, that we're communitarians at heart, you know, not socialists, but we're communitarians, you know, it's about community, and it's so fundamental, and I feel it's so critical to bring forward in this time, in particular, when the assumptions that that govern the world and govern America, for me, these past, this time really, has taught me that the assumptions of democracy that I've carried are no longer, like, I shouldn't just assume it's all be all right. And for me, my Jewish identity of, you know, learning about the Holocaust as a kid and bringing that just awareness, hyper-awareness and sensitivity, that's always been separate from current events. It's like that can never happen again, right? But yet, of just, not that it will happen in the same way at all, but just the erosion of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I feel like that's also part of our this Jewish legacy, that we have this awareness that is very just meaningful and relevant today. So that kind of went from land to just the issues of the day, but they feel relevant.
From land to people.
From land to people.
Community.
And really thinking about, I mean, the assumption of, like, of course people are going to respond when world scientists say there is dangers to humanity for changing the chemistry of the atmosphere. Like, when I was a young environmentalist, I thought, of course. I mean, it's clear, you know, those pronouncements have been made since the 90s. And here we are, and it's like, oh. And I feel Jewish life in particular, that's part of my heritage. I feel like it's really like every moment is vitally important and meaningful, and we do change people's lives and change ourselves, and that's present with me.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Nice.